Your worship,
Yes.
we had talked with the planners, and Mr. Henderson's only here for one item, which is towards the end on the discussion on the zoning bylaw. You know, it'd be kind-hearted if we might move that up further up in the agenda so he doesn't have to sit around for an hour and a half of discussion before we get to his item, which, if you don't mind.
He did text me and let me know that he'd like to stay for as much as possible this evening, though. So I'm sure we can call that a friendly amendment to the agenda. I'm sure. I don't think any council would be opposed to that. So we wouldn't do it for Xander, but we'll do it for Alex.
Thank you.
Hopefully Xander's hearing that.
Your worship at 6:45.
Perfect. So we will call to order the regular council meeting here Monday, April 4th at 6:45 p.m. We are airing it via Zoom, and I apologize for the change. Originally, we're going to do this in person, but myself, I have currently dealing with COVID-19 in my household, and I'm isolating. So I appreciate the flexibility this evening. Of course, you can join the Zoom webinar by registering, but in particular, you could send an email to p@townofstanders.ca, and Paul will make sure to put that in the comments. So once again, I appreciate all members of council being in attendance, and I want to recognize that we are on the unceded traditional territory of the Pescatoup-Magadi people. I'll be looking for a motion to approve this agenda as circulated. I've got Councillor Heenan and seconded by Councillor Hurdle. Any changes to this agenda? I will say a friendly amendment that we will be moving the zoning particular motion ahead as we do have Mr. Henderson with us this evening, and in respect for his time, we'd like to get that out of the way so he can enjoy the rest of his evening, hopefully without too many other files to look at. So with that being said, all in favor of approving this agenda, please signify by saying aye. And anyone opposed? So no one opposed. Councillor Gubishal, you're in favor, correct? I think he's got a little delay on his thing. Yeah, or you're in favor? Okay, perfect. So that's everybody that has been carried. At this time, we'll get into disclosure of conflict of interest. Is there any disclosures anyone would like to declare at this time? Seeing none. So we do have a presentation this evening, so we'll take care of that first. I'm glad to see that we have members of Eastern Charlotte Waterways with us, both Aldia and Brianna. So thank you for being here. And they're going to be doing a presentation this evening on the finalized municipal greenhouse gas emission and energy study in regards to the decision of council setting the target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions for the community by 30%. So I'm not sure which of you talented individuals is going to be actually presenting this evening first, but I'll pass the floor over to you, and welcome and thanks for joining us.
That would be me. Thank you, Your Worship and councillors, for having me tonight. I'm going to share my screen for our presentation. All right, so I would like to present ECW's greenhouse gas mitigation plan for St. Andrews. I'd like to start with an overview of the whole project and where we're at. So milestone one was to create a baseline inventory of GHG emissions. Then we set an emissions and energy reduction target, which council did 30% below 2020 levels by 2034. And milestone 3, which is this presentation today, is to develop a local action plan to guide the municipality to meet this reduction goal. These will be followed by implementation and monitoring of the plan. Quick recap of what GHG inventory was. By sector, 49% was building emissions, 30% was water and wastewater system emissions, 11% was streetlight emissions, and 10% vehicle fleet emissions. There was no data available for solid waste, and overall, the top 10 emitting assets across sectors were as follows, and the very top 3, the arena complex, the wastewater treatment plant, and the water treatment plant contributed to 60% of overall emissions. So just those top 3. So the methodology for the action plan was meetings and consultations with town staff and the Environmental Advisory Committee, building site visits with the asset manager, a site visit of the wastewater treatment facility, and then research on plans for comparable municipalities. So based on methods from the previous slide, current conditions and priority strategies were identified for each sector, starting with buildings, the priority asset being the arena complex and a priority strategy being renewable energy. It was found that most equipment efficiencies in the buildings had already been achieved. Several of the buildings are relatively new and therefore already quite energy efficient, and that lighting is 40% away from being completely LED across all buildings. The water system, we looked at 6 categories of strategies identified by the EPA for reducing energy use. These are conservation, efficiency of facilities, and buildings, and things such as that. A lot of the buildings and equipment efficiencies involved in the waste water system and the potable water system have already been achieved. And the wastewater treatment has quite a fixed energy use because of the nature of treating the wastewater. All the equipment has to run all the time. For the streetlight sectors, it was found that all streetlights have already been converted to LED and that there was limited potential for operational changes because it's dependent on the time of day and the light and is there for safety. The main strategy identified for vehicles was exploring alternatives to gasoline and diesel, and we'll go further into that in the action items. So those were all the sectors included in the inventory because that's what the PCP program requires. But we did look at a few other categories of sectors that were deemed as valuable to include even if they weren't included in PCP. So those would be solid waste. It was not accounted for in the inventory, but actions were still identified because it's still considered valuable, and emission reductions could be still calculated at the project level for these. As with land use and green space and sinks, which were also not accounted for, but are a valuable way to reduce greenhouse gases. And community actions, which were also deemed valuable by the Environmental Advisory Committee. Going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the top emitting buildings and a little recap of the findings, keeping in mind that heating and lighting and insulation are the main factors to how energy efficient a building is. So starting with the WC O'Neill, the biggest draw is the ice plant, and there are quite a few upgrades already planned for that, so that'll affect future inventories. It was found that there's areas of the arena that were lacking insulation and that there's only 20% of the LED light conversion left to do. Next was the library. LED lighting is planned for the coming year, so that will also be reflected in the next inventory. All of the lights, according to the asset manager, are already purchased. They just need to be installed. The town hall insulation, lighting, and heating upgrades have all been recently made in the last few years. The fire station has a heat pump and LED lighting, so also been upgraded quite recently. The health center, which was included in the original 2020 inventory, has moved in 2021, so that will be reflected in the next inventory and is something to watch out for. Sheriff Andrews' house is in the top emitting buildings, but it's actually owned by the province, and so the town is unable to make changes. And then the Public Works garage is one of the only buildings left that uses heating fuel, and a heat pump is actually planned for the next 5 years to be changed. And so that will be another already planned change that should reduce your energy use. There's also heating loss to the opening and closing doors, which is really hard to avoid, and the building itself is already kept just above freezing. So that's all the current conditions. Moving on to the action plan. There's 32 proposed action items. They're all formatted into an implementation table. They each have a responsible lead and a proposed start date. Most have a potential funding identified, and a lot of the actions are complementary to existing plans. So full details of each action item can be found in the draft plan that was provided to council ahead of time, and this presentation will also be shared afterwards. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to go quite quickly through the action items at quite a high level. And if you have any questions, please note the action item and I can answer them towards the end. So starting with building action items, Action 1 was to convert the energy source of the WC O'Neill and potentially surrounding buildings to a renewable source, potentially solar, wind, or geothermal. This would require a further study, and there were some concerns identified by or some barriers identified by the Environmental Advisory Committee, whether solar could provide enough energy for the WC O'Neill, and also if geothermal was even possible because of the bedrock. So this would require a further technical study. So the recommendation is that the town have that done. But it has the possibility of offsetting all of the arena's emissions. And so it's a big chunk. It was the 33% from the previous slide of overall emissions. Action 2 is to look into real ice for the arena. It's a technology that enables ice resurfacing with cold water instead of hot, therefore saving energy. There is a full quote and a energy savings profile in the plan, but it would save 88.8 tons of CO2 annually. There is options to rent it to try it out beforehand. Action 3 is green building standards. This would be a measure to ensure future energy efficiency in buildings. Could use existing standards such as LEED and adapt them to town specific cases. Action 4 is LED light transition. This one is already in progress. The recommendation is just that you complete the 40% left to do. And this was one that LED lighting uses 60% less energy, and therefore overall the buildings, it would add up after a while. Action 5 is to insulate the theater roof and dormitory area of the arena. It was identified by the asset manager that there's quite a bit of heat loss through this, and insulation would, reduce the energy use. Action 6 is to redo the roof and ceiling of the arena and replace it with a low emission ceiling. It was identified that the roof will need replacing in the near future. And so this recommendation here is to replace it with a low emission ceiling. And this has also quite a large reduction over time, potentially 77,000 kilowatt hours per year. Action 6 is energy conversion from heating fuel to a more energy efficient source. This is specifically for the 3 buildings that still currently use heating fuel, most notably the Public Works Garage as a priority. The Historic Courthouse and the Ross Museum maybe less so because they are seasonal. Action 8 is to add occupancy sensors to the public bathrooms and lighting timers to building areas. This was suggested in the 2008 audit, but hasn't been fully completed yet and has the potential to reduce energy waste by 68%. Action 9 is, there are 2 guides for strategies for reducing energy in arenas that were found very useful. There's an Federation of Canadian Municipality fact sheet, and then an arena guides for using less electricity. The suggestion is that both guides are examined for strategies that are relevant to the WC O'Neill. A lot of them are operational changes to like ice thickness and to controlling temperature. And of course, it's no one size fits all. So all of these individual smaller actions should be identified to see if they're relevant to the WC O'Neill. And then the final building action item is to have a new energy audit done for the top 10 emitting buildings in the near future. The last energy audit was done 14 years ago, and there have been many building changes since then. And so looking to the future, doing a new one with updated data would be great. Moving on to water system action items. 11 is to using rain barrels for municipal spaces and community gardens. This could replace water use that is currently used for watering gardens. Action 12 is promoting water conservation and the efficient use of water in the community. This would reduce the loads on lifts and the energy they use through the town. Action 13 is to install energy saving plumbing fixtures in municipal buildings. These could include low flow toilets, toilet dams, faucet aerators or washers, and implemented over time as things need replacing. Action 14 is to introduce natural stormwater infrastructure. This is something that was identified in the 2014 sewer management plan. They identified several different types of infrastructure. The recommendation here is that the municipality should evaluate the best places for these infrastructure and continue to implement them. And this is in line with current policies in the municipal plan. Action 15 is another one that's present in the stormwater management plan and should be continued to be implemented. So vehicle action items. Action 16 is to explore conversion of the vehicle fleet from gas to diesel to a lower emitting energy. This would require a full study, which the town has already applied for one through ETF. So hopefully they get that. And this would include exploring multiple options like EVs or propane. Action 17 is the promotion of fuel efficient driving among town staff. A bit of a smaller one, but there are many ways in which you can drive more efficiently, and promoting that within town staff could make a small help. Moving on to solid waste action items. So these are ones, again, that weren't included in inventory, but are still deemed valuable. Action 18 is to explore an industrial composter for municipal town waste. There are existing plans out there of how much this can cost. They're included in the full local action plan. And as a potential alternative, an anaerobic digester for municipal organic waste could also be explored. These would both require a bit more study into a cost benefit analysis of purchasing one of these. So land use and green space and greenhouse gas sink action items, greenhouse gas sink being an actual physical reservoir or a process that captures greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So action 20 is an urban forestry plan. This is also proposed in the climate adaptation plan. And trees have a large potential to absorb carbon dioxide. And so that would be a source of a sink. Action 21 is protecting town-owned green spaces. Again, a sink, and it can also help with limiting stormwater runoff. Action 22 is conversion of town-owned vacant lots and brownfields to green spaces. So analyzing municipal land that is currently vacant or unused and seeing whether it could be turned into green space and therefore capturing greenhouse gases. So now we go into community action items. Action 23 is public engagement. This was identified as a priority for the Environmental Advisory Committee to make the community aware of all of these climate mitigating strategies. Action 24 is business outreach, to do much the same with businesses. Action 25 is active transportation promotion and expanding local trail system, one that the town is already in the progress of doing. It's just continue to do this one. Action 26 is public transportation promotion, especially through existing services to help mitigate greenhouse gas effects. Further community action items is looking into doing a feasibility study for community-wide composting service. 28 to facilitate composting within the community garden and youth garden to further target food waste. Action 29 to promote fuel efficient driving within the community. And action 30, a look at the possibility of a town-wide anti-idling policy. And then the very last sector is one that or action items that would affect all sectors. So one of them being a town-wide renewable energy or waste energy for district heating. And that would require technical study as well. And action 32 is to advocate for a hired position to implement all of these actions for someone with the time and the energy and the capacity to do these things. So implementation and monitoring of all of these actions led by town council, overseen by the CAO. Monitoring will be done by continuing to perform GHG inventories. A lot of these action items, it's unknown exactly the number of tons of CO2 that they will reduce. So the best way to figure it out is doing an aggregate inventory over the years. And specific actions that aren't included in the original inventory could also be accounted for through a project level examination of the reduction. And success stories should be shared with the community as things are being implemented. And it is suggested that around the halfway point in developing the subsequent plan. Just some conclusions and final thoughts of what I found. I would say that St. Andrews is ahead of the curve. You have a lot of these actions in existing plans already, which is great to see. There's also the consideration that local governance reform will have an effect on this plan and assets may change for the town. So it is important that the plan evolves over the next 12 years and that all of these actions are a base as the town works towards their emissions reduction target. Are there any questions?
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. I'm actually impressed that you were able to go through all those action items in such a quick but concise manner. So excellent presentation and timing this evening, to say the least. I would take probably an hour to go through that. I'll open it up. I guess I have a question, but I'll open it up to council first to see if there's any questions, first of all, from any member of council. Okay, my quick one would be, I guess you could say I'm kind of a numbers person. So when we're looking at a target of 30%, I was wondering how hard would it be to put some anticipated values by like percentage for say, so say if you look for an alternative source of energy for the W.C. O'Neill Arena. I was wondering if it could show an overall percentage of the actual town's, I guess you could say, carbon reduction. Just because as we're looking at all these options, a lot of them, some of them no cost to them at all, which is great to see, but some of them there's going to be competing priorities for council as they're going through a budget deliberation, especially over the remainder of this term anyway. So I'd really like to be completely honest, I'd rather make the biggest impact for the dollar. So I was wondering, is it hard to add in anticipated kind of values, or at least percentage of overall reductions?
Well, thank you for your question. Yeah, in the implementation table, some actions do have like an associated carbon reduction with them. Some things are a lot harder to calculate, like the ceiling, because the square footage and what kind of material you replace it with. It's pretty hard to know. It's possible. I would require a lot more information to do that. Looking at like renewable energy for the arena complex, obviously that's 32% of your emissions right there. So if you were to replace that with the renewable energy, that's pretty much your goal right there. Because they're 30%, but that's a bit of a more complicated one.
It is, but when you're like me, you like to go straight to the source, and if you can swing big and hit the target, doesn't mean you can't over-deliver it. But if we're going to reduce a number like that, it almost feels like all those other actions combined are probably equivalent to that, which just kind of, maybe I'm underestimating it, but I wouldn't be probably too far off, I'm guessing. So, Mr. Spear, I see your hand.
Thank you, Worship. Just one quick question for ECW is, activity has already changed on our behalf. For instance, we leased out the dorm rooms this year, so there's going to be increased costs for that. And then with the local government amalgamation, it's hard to say, we might be putting on more kilometers on our vehicles, for instance, over the next few years. I'm just wondering how that's all going to be worked into our final calculations. Like, we could become more efficient. So if you think big, let's say we took over the whole province of New Brunswick, then our gross numbers are going to be much larger. But if we drove all electric vehicles, then it would cut it in half type of thing, no matter how big our territory. So I'm just wondering, as this begins to happen, how are we going to measure the real efficiencies we're accomplishing when activity could change what we're measuring?
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely ways to introduce kind of like standardization as you do future inventories. You could do things like calculating emissions per square foot of building, for example. That might be choices that kind of have to be made as future inventories are done. Like just comparing kind of similar assets to what you already have. Yeah, I'm not sure if you have anything to say on this, Brianna.
I think it's a really valid question, and I think that it sort of lends itself to the evolution process of, how carbon or for how greenhouse gas emissions sort of exist regardless, especially as you acquire new assets or you use some assets less than others. And it's always going to be a natural fluidity to the process, which is why this initial baseline inventory that we prepared for 2020 is a benchmark and not necessarily going to 100% reflect what it will be moving forward, So I think that process that Aldia was talking about during the presentation of reassessing at a relatively frequent time during a relatively frequent timeline would be really important. And I think we already identified local governance reform as being something that is something as simple as you guys driving to farther distances. That's going to have to be a factor as well. Yeah.
It's a good question, because you look at like a town truck going to Shamcook, it's going to obviously put out some more emissions. But if it means that a provincial truck isn't coming from a provincial garage 40 kilometers away to go there, the overall impact on our environment is actually to the better. So it'll be hard to get a baseline on that really, and figure out how you blend our current target in with a potential merger with Bayside and Shamcook. So that's what our team from Eastern Charlotte Ways is here to do. So luckily we don't have to figure that one out.
And I think the reality too, Your Worship, is always that you have, a present constant calculation, and there will always be externalities and other variables that have to come into play. So what we were able to do with the baseline inventory is provide you that constant with the acknowledgement that these other externalities will be factored in.
That's great. Any other member of Councilor Blanchard, and then we'll go to Councilor Heenan after that.
Thank you, Worship. Just one quick thing, just to say thanks to Eastern Charlotte Waterways for the presentation and the recommendations. Like I said, there's a lot there for sure. A lot I think that we can take on, and I know that there's a lot going on in the background as well with Quest, some other sort of avenues that the town is exploring, and members of this council and members of our environmental advisory committee are all part of. I'm sure these can all be blended together, and I think to a certain extent, a lot of them kind of are. One thing I just wanted to mention on the action items, what I really did like was the advocating for a position on the Service Commission to aid in climate change. I would mention that the town of Moncton actually has one of those positions. I think they're one of the few, I think, in the province, but they do have someone, and that is their primary job, to look at the entire municipal operations through a green lens and how they can implement and integrate all those different things between all the different departments within the town. So I think regionally that would be a great model. I think if we could have something like that and all the communities within the service region could share in that, I think that's a great idea. So I just wanted to make a particular note of that. Also in that, like you said, as we talked about how things will change, the town itself will expand as well too, right? So I'm thinking about the carbon sinks and the green areas and all those types of things now that we'll have a bit more to the community. So I'm just, like I said, it will be interesting in terms of how we sort of play with the numbers and how that sort of reflects, the future. Because it would be nice to have that sort of baseline, from as a standard. And then if we were the same and we could measure the same thing in 3 years or 6 years or whatever the case might be. But yeah, everything is going to look a little bit different as we move forward beyond the end of this year. So anyways, I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation. I think it's excellent.
Thank you, Councilor Blanchard. Councilor Heenan.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for a great presentation. Councillor Blanchard sort of touched on what I was going to say, but as you know, and from reading in the paper, we have a 14% increase in people arriving in St. Andrews. And the other thing is we have a lot of homes that were just partially used in the summer, et cetera, that have been sold and are now full-time residences. So this could affect some of your bases when comparing. It's just simply because more people cause more well, a bigger footprint. And that to me is a good thing, because it means more for the town, but we also have to keep it in mind that it's, it can reflect a little bit on our goal. So I just want to point that out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Good point, though. If you look at the W.C. O'Neill Arena, we're certainly utilizing that building better. When you look at the Chamber of Commerce being there, obviously our medical center. So although we're trying to reduce emissions, we're actually getting more out of that building. So it's really hard to say it's apples to apples when you look at what was there 10 years ago. So no different than, some costs or sorry, not costs, but some emissions are fixed depending, a building costs a building. But to your point, if the W.C. O'Neill Arena gets busier because of a rec director using the ice more regularly and having lights on more regularly, that's kind of going against what we're trying to accomplish. So sometimes success can take away from a target. So that's an important concept for us to consider as we look at what was 12 years ago, maybe versus what is today. So good comments. Anyone else? Otherwise, we'll move on. We do have a big agenda this evening, and not that I want to take away from this, because I really did enjoy this presentation. And the one thing I'll say is I'm delighted to see that there was 32 items versus 3, because what we need to have a wide variety of options to try to improve as a community. And I do really take pride in the statement that we are ahead of the curve, but this council and staff made a commitment to not just be ahead of the curve, but to actually be a leader in the province. So kudos to council, and Eastern Charlotte Waterways is such a big part of that. Without this information and this analysis with help of town staff like Mr. Acton and things like that, we wouldn't be able to even think about going after this target. So thank you for your time this evening. And I'll at that, unless you really want to stay for the next 2 hours, I'll let you sign off. So that's it for presentations. I am going to quickly fly through the approval of the minutes. Before I get into the approval of minutes, is there anyone that sees any changes? Otherwise, I'll fly through them. Was there any changes? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I will fly through them very quick. The first one that I'll be looking for approval of the minutes is of the public hearing objections to amendment MP 20-01 to municipal plan 20-01 on Monday, March 7th, 6:30 p.m. be adopted. A mover, please. I've got Councillor Hurdle, seconded by Councillor Heenan. All in favor of approving these minutes, please signify by saying aye. That's everybody. Those have been approved. The next minutes are the public hearing objections to amendment Z 21-07 to zoning bylaw Z 21-01. That was Monday, March 7th at 6:45 p.m. Mover for those minutes. Okay, Deputy Mayor Akaji, and seconded by Councillor Blanchard. All in favor of those minutes, please signify by saying aye. That's everybody. The next minutes are the minutes of the public hearing objections to amendment Z 21-08 to zoning bylaw Z 21-01. Again, Monday, March 7th, 2022 at 7 p.m. Mover for that one. Got Councillor Heenan and seconded by Councillor Gumashell. All in favor of those minutes, please signify by saying aye. Just 2 more sets. The minutes of the regular council meeting on Monday, March 7th at 7:15 p.m. A mover for those ones. Got Councillor Blanchard and seconded by Councillor Hurdle. All in favor of those minutes, please signify by saying aye. And just to put us out in record fashion, as quick as possible, the last one is the regular council meeting on Monday, March 21st at 6:30 p.m. A mover for those minutes. Deputy Mayor Akaji and seconded by Councillor Blanchard. All in favor of approving those minutes, please signify by saying aye. That is everybody, so those have been carried. So we do have a quick one under communications. I'm just going to jump ahead. Highlighted it to save us a little bit of time, not that it's not important. So it is regard to Brunswick Organ and Tissue Program National Organ and Tissue Donation Awareness Week, which is April 24th to 30th, 2022. Horizon Health Network, New Brunswick's Organ and Tissue Program is raising awareness for organ tissue and donation on Green Shirt Day, which is Thursday, April 7th, and during National Organ and Tissue Donation Awareness Week from April 24th to 30th. They're working with Canada's organ and tissue donation transplantation community during the month of April to inspire New Brunswickers and all Canadians to register their intent to donate and talk to the closest to them about their decision to donate. They're asking for the town's participation on April 7th for Green Shirt Day, which is this coming week, and also to give for National Organ and Tissue Donation Awareness Week. So again, wear green April 7th, and they're asking us to consider lighting up our building and landmarks green, so Town Hall. And of course, we encourage us to join in the conversation, to encourage others in our community to donate. And of course, we will have a post through town social media, or if anyone would like any additional information on town hall. So that is the communication. I don't believe there is a motion pertaining to this. Is that correct, Mr. Knopper? So can I just get some consensus? Is that okay to do, Mr. Knopper? Just for us to formally light the town hall green, just to give direction and to encourage town staff to wear green. Anyone, I guess, just a show of hands, if you're in support of that particular communication we received. That's everybody, so we'll consider that approved, and we'll do our best to draw awareness to that wonderful cause. At this point, we're going to jump into staff report, and then we will quickly, Mr. Henderson, at that point, move your item forward and move on for that, but that's part of the passing consideration of bylaws. So thanks for your patience this evening.
Thank you, Worship. Everyone hear me okay? So with the warmer weather right around the corner and less snow in the forecast, the town is slowly opening up for the upcoming spring and summer seasons. I am happy to report on the ongoing affairs of your council and local government. As most of you know, the town, Bayside and Shamcook will be amalgamated into a new entity. The advisory committee, made up of members from these areas, has worked very well together through the first few stages as in achieve the timelines put out by the provincial government. Staff is working on a website that will provide better communications on what has been achieved and any changes forthcoming. We are grateful for the cooperation among the group to work towards the long-term goals, which is ultimately a thriving community. You are also updating, Council's also updating your code of conduct bylaw to reflect the wisdom learned internally and from other communities. Stronger enforcement measures have been added to provide council the ability to deal with a member that acted severely outside the bylaw and frankly outside the spirit of good governance, respect, and dignity of elected officials. Any measures can only be executed by a majority vote of council and not from the recommendations of staff or the public. In extraordinary circumstances, an outside consultant could be brought in. I expect this bylaw to be a preventative measure and hopefully will never be tested in St. Andrews. Included with the council package for this meeting is an update on pricing and options for completing the long talked about Wharf refurbishment. As you can see, due to the current uncertainty in the marketplace, as well as the supply chain issues that have plagued us for over 2 years, the original $5.5 million budget has now gone up significantly. As of the writing of this report, we are looking at other scenarios in conjunction with the consultants that we can bring forward. If requested, we can have an engineer down and provide council with the feedback and the opportunity for you to ask more questions. Last week, council approved 2 infrastructure tenders that were part of the current year's capital budget. Before the public opening, staff were very concerned that the bids would be quite high due to ongoing inflation causing skyrocketing building costs. It was a pleasant surprise to have them come in below budget. From administration, I'm happy to report that we are back to our full complement of staff in Town Hall with the hiring of 2 people in the finance department. I'd like to welcome our new accounting clerk, Jacqueline Sarion, and Andrew Lord, assistant treasurer. I appreciate council's patience as the financial reports have not been presented since December. However, we maintain controls and have internal reports that keep us abreast of our financial position. The advertisements have gone out for the new recreation director position, which will have closed as of this meeting date. Town staff, as well as a member of the recreation team at the Service Commission, plan to review the resumes and narrow it down to a few. Depending on the number of strong candidates, we may interview several and narrow it down to 2 or 3 and include a member of council in the final interview. As some have noticed, we put out a survey regarding daycare availability in the area. A common complaint that we have received is the lack of spaces for children too young to be in the school system. Admittedly, this is not an issue most local governments deal with. However, council recognizes that to have successful economic development and population growth, we need to have a certain level of services available for those moving into St. Andrews. We are looking at various facilities and trying to coordinate the stakeholders to hopefully grow the number of available slots. Staff is working diligently with a couple of developers to move their projects into construction this year. The unexpected inflation we've experienced in the first quarter has put a lot of pressure on building materials, which will ultimately affect the eventual rent or sale price. Although the developers acknowledge the challenges they are facing, they both hope to begin construction in the next several months. Various agreements will be brought forward before council for your consideration and input, and final authorization for the mayor to execute. We are happy to report the town yard sale is taking place again this spring after a 2-year hiatus on May 14th. Services. The fire chief and his members wish to express thanks to council for approving the ladder truck. It has been a long discussed tool that they were eagerly awaiting its arrival. In the month, there were 9 calls, of which 2 are for structure fires. With the spring thaw underway, Public Works has been prepping benches, picnic tables, and garbage cans before they are placed out in a few weeks. During this time of year, whenever there is a rain event, they are clearing ditches before and during the storm to reduce localized flooding in the town. Our staff has also been replacing older lights with LED fixtures in the arena to continue the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reducing overall power costs. After the first quarter, the RSC has issued $1.3 million in building permits compared to $613,000 in the same period last year. We have had contact with several property owners who will be building this year, so I expect significant increases from 2021 moving forward. Their staff has also been instrumental in providing the zoning bylaw and updating the zoning bylaw and assisting us with various development agreements as well. The Ross Memorial Library has reopened its seed library again for aspiring gardeners, everything from annuals and perennials to vegetables. The library manager is also happy to report that children's programming has begun again. The clerk has been busy working with the solicitor and writing the agreements between the town and potential developers. We have kept counsel in the loop, as well as a solicitor who has provided advice on each of the drafts. He has also been submitting funding applications whenever an opportunity arises, so we can take advantage of the multiple and sometimes overlapping agencies that want to provide grants. In conclusion, 2022 is going to be a busy construction year for the town. A typical practice, we aim to keep the roads open during the busy summer season. We are working on better communication for those who will be directly affected. However, upgrading infrastructure is a great sign of continued growth and that council prioritizes key services. We look forward to the reopening of the town post-pandemic and trying to live within the new normal and get our lives back on track. Respectfully submitted, Chris Spear, CAO.
Sorry, had you on mute there. Thank you, Mr. Spear, for the staff report. And I know that obviously we're keeping the financials up to date. Is there anything you want to highlight on the financial side before we get into the accepting of the staff reports?
I think the only thing, Your Worship, is that the winter, in some ways, because of the several little storms we have, the ice or salt, budget is going to be up a little bit, and labor costs could be higher. If you remember, it's going to be a lot of weekend storms this year, so we got into a lot of overtime compared to previous winters. But with the hiring, it was our assistant treasurer's first day today, so by next meeting we'll have an updated report for the first quarter.
Perfect. It's my first year signing checks when it comes to related to snow removal and salt and things like that. But I was surprised at how often it was required. So I'm not surprised at that at all. But it did snow a lot on weekends, as we know as well, and evenings. It was very rarely Monday to Friday during the week. So that's not obviously, it's ideal for traveling to work, but not ideal for savings for the municipality. Any questions from any member of council? Councillor Hurdle.
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to, as I read these staff reports when they come in, I just wanted to briefly just, say that I'm humbled every time by the creativity and dedication of the staff and the work that goes into doing these reports as well. I feel like we're all very fortunate to have these folks on our team for the tremendous amount of work that they do, and I just wanted to recognize that.
Thank you very much. Very good comment, Councillor Hurdle. Any questions for Mr. Spear outside of that? All right, all those in favor of accepting the staff report, could I have a mover to accept the staff report? Councillor Hurdle and second by Councillor Gubishel. And then I'll say all in favor of accepting the staff reports, just please signify by saying aye. tongue-tied a lot tonight. That's everybody. Those have been accepted. So we are getting in the introduction, consideration, passing of bylaws and motions. We will be going a little out of order and respect for Mr. Henderson's time. He was nice enough to sit through the first 45 minutes. So I apologize for that, Mr. Henderson, but we're going to get right into the discussion of the zoning bylaw Z22-01. And I know that there is a staff report on page 116 of your council reports that we've all had time to review. I don't know, to kick off, if Mr. Spear or Mr. Henderson would like to speak to the staff report.
I could give a couple comments if you'd like, Chris and your worship.
That would be good, just for context for the public for sure, and for members of council that first time seeing some of the things within it, obviously.
I could potentially give a little presentation, but if that's unnecessary, I could kind of just do the high level points too. So
you waited 45 minutes for us, so whatever is easiest for you.
All right, I'll do the presentation. It's short.
Okay.
All right. Oh, everybody's seeing that the same way. There we go. All right, so this is Z2201, the repeal and replace of the zoning bylaw. And that is because there's a number of amendments throughout the document. And there's several themes to these amendments. First one being to do with density. So the point of increasing density has a number of factors here, and they're laid out as follows: affordability, accessibility, fiscal sustainability, and climate change mitigation. Here's a little graphic, which this was actually prepared by Xander Gopin, and the graphic he put here shows the urban areas that are more dense and their CO2 emissions. So we just had a great presentation by ECW on their proposal to town for your emissions reduction. Density is one of the ways you can achieve that through land use. So reducing the length of trips people have to make by having people located closer to services, increasing walkability, has a number of really positive benefits, including the climate change aspect. So one of the other things that the zoning bylaw permits is these ADUs, accessory dwelling units, backyard garden suites. The current maximum is set at 645 square feet, and this was taken out of the previous iteration of the zoning bylaw, I believe in 2010. But when we're looking at the actual accessory structure size, it's set at 904 square feet. So you could have a building in your backyard up to 904 square feet. But if people are living in it, and then it has to go down. It is a fairly arbitrary distinction, and it made sense to just make it compatible. So that the maximum size is the same, no matter what kind of structure it is in your backyard. So this one thing that this does, it doesn't affect the visual character of a community too. So we're not allowing overly big structures in backyards. So 900 square feet isn't huge, but it just has that compatibility. So we can use structures, have them converted into more affordable housing. And it's a great way to use existing services, not having to extend new roads, new pipes. It's there, built areas that are already built up that can accommodate more housing. So this is some of the rules which apply to row houses. When we were looking at some proposals for development, it came to our attention that the frontage requirements that were in the zoning bylaw, which we inherited from 2010 as well, they're too restrictive. 12 meters is too wide for your standard row house. And we looked at 6 meters to be the standard width of a row house. And some of the other lot width requirements, again, row house is a dwelling that has party walls with your neighbor. So you're actually on your own lot and you share a lot line in the party wall. So the lot width and the frontage is the width of the building. So 6 meters wide made sense. And so we have a proposal here that showed 8 meters wide as the proposed row house width in one development proposal. Looking at MR2 in general, so this is your high density residential zone. Currently, the only development that utilizes this zone is Anchor's Landing. And that zone was developed specifically for Anchor's Landing. But when we're looking at other sites throughout the municipality that could potentially host high density residential, the way that zone was drafted, it really was specific for Anchor's Landing and Anchor's Landing only. And not every property is going to have those same features. So the idea of looking at other communities to see how they're doing high density residential and their standards made sense. So this is just a chart showing what Sackville, Fredericton, Wolfville, some communities with some comparable characteristics, how they're handling their higher density residential. So what St. Andrews has proposed here wouldn't put you in an extreme category in any sense. It gives a base level for the lot size instead of what we had before, which was quite huge. It's going down to just a standard size of area that could be used for high density residential. And when you get into these floating categories, you can sometimes find you run out of lot area or frontage, and you have an unnecessarily large property required to do any sort of apartments. And so we're going down the list here, very comparable standards, kind of right in the middle sweet spot, and not changing any the significant factors like maximum heights, for example, which when you get into apartments, that's the real limiting factors, that height requirement. So that is not being proposed to be changed. Yeah, so any new MR2, multiple residential high density, that's going to require rezoning. So the one point here, which Xander points out, is that the only other property that's pre-zoned for this would be the RFP property. And that's what municipality owns. Basically, it's out for RFP, request for proposals, that is. And municipality can evaluate each and every request coming in to see if it's compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. But not everyone can just do an apartment just because they have these lot sizes. You need to have that zoning too. That allows council to evaluate each and every request. So he also points out that the MR1, which is the lower multiple unit residential zone, meaning it doesn't have the same level of density, this is the appropriate zone for the town plat. When we're talking about the town plat and the Heritage Business District in specific, one of the other limiting factors for more apartments is parking. So currently the parking minimum is set at 1.25 spaces per unit. This is fairly restrictive, and there are some reasons for the 1.25, which we could get into. But in cases of downtown parking, you're seeing a lot of communities lower or eliminate these parking requirements entirely. So the suggestion here to council is to lower it specifically in the HBD, the Historic Business District and Town Plat, because this has been something which has required variances in the past to do reasonable developments. We also have the fact that currently apartments are penalized for parking versus single family dwellings, which only require one space for a single family dwelling, whereas an apartment requires 1.25 spaces. And the reason that 1.25 exists is the idea of having room for guest parking. But whereas single family dwellings typically are actually households that may have more than one vehicle, it is kind of there is a sort of equity issue here too. So where in areas where parking is a constraint and where walkability is more possible, the HBD and the town plat, going to one space makes sense. And it's a moderate change to the bylaw as opposed to it's not an extreme elimination of parking requirements. It's just it's a moderate tweak to it. So here's an example here that Xander pointed out that Antagonist recently approved a 35 unit building with only 7 parking spaces. So that's 0.2 spots per unit. And you also could see an example here in Fredericton that recently approved a, I think it was near 100 units or somewhere in that range. And it was in the 0.6 parking spaces per unit. And so you've seen this more and more, and it's a way to facilitate lifestyles outside of car dependency. And it's difficult in rural areas, but not impossible. And it's moving toward that direction, albeit slowly. And this last point here is that without doing this, you can basically prohibit development in HBD, the historic business district. You do not want to have parking lots rule in your downtown. If anything, the car should be secondary to other modes of transport in the downtown. It was never designed for cars in the first place. So the beauty of downtown, the beauty of HBD is that it's dense, it's walkable, it has those characteristics of an old town feel. And with just covering it with surface parking, unfortunately, that would ruin the very thing people are drawn to when it comes to the historic business district of St. Andrews. So with that, I believe that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sander. I appreciate that. So council, we have seen that in the past, but I always think it's nice. We just got through a hearing of objections, but to continue to keep that level of clarity on what we're working on. I will note that based on feedback that we're receiving out of the all of the highlights that Mr. Henderson gave us, is it appears the one that's most up for debate is the 1.25 to 1 parking spots in downtown St. Andrews. So at least from the standpoint of the main basis of the petition and the other letter that we received, I would say that that would be the main opposition that we have out of the changes. The other ones, to be honest, I haven't heard a whole lot. I will note that staff is actually adding a couple of points. They're looking to potentially add a development agreement clause. Is that correct, Mr. Spear, to that? And what that means is that it's just a checkpoint. It's almost, is it safe to say it's an optional or best practice right now, Mr. Spear, but there's nothing that's making it happen? Is that the best way to say it?
Well, strictly looking at the Community Planning Act, which directs all of our zoning bylaws and stuff, there's certain circumstances where, like a rezoning, where a development agreement is necessary, but there's other times when it's not. And so our lawyer's saying in other jurisdictions that he works with, it's put into the zoning bylaw so that it gives us a little bit more control. And again, it's not about council trying to reshape what someone proposes, but what I tell developers is if you're selling something to council, it's to make sure that you follow what you've sold to council and not end up with a terrifically different type of project after the fact.
I think that it's a good practice to get into. I just got a question on that because I'm all for almost the check and balance of getting it done to make sure that developers are building what they say they're going to build. But I am aware of a reputation of the town of St. Andrews and other municipalities for being too red tape, and adding this in might almost be perceived as just another barrier of red tape after they've already complied to zoning bylaws. So I get more of a question on something I heard when I was in Toronto at the Economic Club of Canada. Don Arnold, who's the mayor of Moncton, said that assuming that there's no big challenges, that they can expect to get a development agreement within 3 to 4 business days signed. So I guess my question on a comment like that, and I know that that's hard to deliver, is there a way in which a development agreement could be signed by staff, meaning that if it's respecting the zoning bylaws, we don't need to say you got to wait till the next council meeting where we do a big, what do we need to know, where if you're following the zoning bylaws, which is essentially what the town of St. Andrews Council sets, that we don't have to weigh in on that if it's respecting what the wishes are of our, municipal plan and our secondary and our bylaws. I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, I guess one thing is, and Alex can go in, but if it's something, a development that outside of the rezoning, everything else falls within the plans, and it's a real simple scenario. But in most cases, when development agreements are put in place, there's various things that are changing. And so with Ms. Arnold saying that they did it in 4 days, that is blowing my mind. I don't know how they would. So I'd have to go up and get legal opinion. I don't mind calling another clerk up there personally. I can call her and just kind of see how they do it so fast.
But just to be clear on that note, does that mean that if something's straightforward, we're still gonna ask for the development agreement? Is that what it's saying, just as a clause? Because if something's straightforward, I understand why you make them sign it to be accountable. I just don't know why we would make it go back to council if it's something that staff can do. Does council understand what I'm saying? Like, it's one thing if it's something that we're bending on or objecting, but if you're respecting, you know, the bylaws and the municipal plan and all the stuff where there's no gray area, I just question if there's in a way that we can just not slow down the process by making council do the red tape, because I'm all for that level of accountability with a developer in the town. It's just, I don't want to make it harder for people that are following our plans to actually build what they want to build. Does that make sense to people?
In your worship, just to play devil's advocate, though, I guess you guys have a whole lot of faith in staff, but what I say with buildings and land planning, it's something that's basically a forever project, right? That you can't undo if you do certain, or put in buildings and things. And so I would think there'd have to be a pretty straightforward project that ticks all the boxes. And so something that comes right to mind is, you know, down the Champlain subdivision, there's a piece of property already zoned MR2. So potentially something could go in there as long as it meets all the requirements of the MR2 zone, just with the building permit. But no, I'm tripping over the toes of Mr. Henderson, who is really the specialist on this. So,
So
yes,
this would
Alex,
be more for subdivision agreements, right? That you're proposing
Yeah.
this for than anything. It wouldn't be just a regular development. Like, it wouldn't be, it's for the subdivision agreement. It's for the more complicated files. Is that safe to say? Like, not all files?
Well, and this is a high density subdivision file. So for instance, something that if we did phase 2 below Diana Drive that we talked about once upon a time, where it's single family dwelling lots, that's a little easier of a thing to do. But when you start putting, you know, unusual housing, so like high density units among single family homes, then it's, you know, I think council would appreciate the sober second thought to look at judges, or staff's recommendations and make the final call.
Perfect. So just to clarify, it's for high density housing only. Is that just to simplify that for council? That's correct?
Well, definitely that, you know, as long as you have single family dwelling units in an area that's zoned appropriately, it just flies through the process. And even our current zoning bylaw allows duplexes and triplexes. It's when you start getting bigger than that into multiple row houses and stuff that we start to have to get into these agreements. But maybe I see the planner is willing to.
Thanks for that. So I think what counts. Oh, go ahead, Councilor Blanchard.
Yeah, just for some clarification, because as I was reading it earlier, it was sort of, excuse me, it was sort of my understanding was that, you know, the development agreements would be in place for any and all. Now, can you maybe? I think you were just sort of speaking to it, Mr. Spear, but can you just refresh or just go over again, maybe if you could, for me, what type of developments would be subject to a subdivision agreement? As like I said, if we're not speaking about everything in general, which ones are we talking about specifically? I think maybe Mayor Henderson said something about high density units. Are we talking about anything like? I'm just looking for some examples here, I guess, of what would be subject to a subdivision agreement.
Well, there's two different things, though. We're talking subdivision agreements and development agreements, so they're two different tools. So a subdivision agreement is basically where you're taking a big parcel and cutting it into multiple little parcels. So, and again, Alex may have to clarify my points, but it's if a developer comes in, say, takes a 2-acre lot and makes it into several small little lots, then that's always going to come to council, possibly the PAC for some terms and conditions. Alex, maybe help me with that one a little bit. That's the first thing on subdivision agreements. So maybe clarify that, Alex.
Yeah, so what, when you were going to want to use these development agreements or subdivision agreements in the case of there being a rezoning of land, or there is a contribution of municipal infrastructure or land or something like that, where you can enter into a voluntary agreement. So these are the two times you want to use can use a development agreement. I haven't seen the text or what's proposed here, but putting it, I don't think you can put it in the text of the bylaw to say it's always required in an instance. But what you could do is you have various scenarios where you are going to be entering into one because you're donating land, like in the case of an RFP, maybe you're doing an exchange for that piece of property, and your condition of selling it is that they enter into a development agreement with you. You can do it in a case like that. Or if you're rezoning land that isn't already zoned and ready to go for the multiple density residential or multiple family residential, then you can do it through section 59 when you do a rezoning of the land. So those are your two instances. The other case is when you're going to do a subdivision and there's a opportunity for public infrastructure or anything like that, that's subject to an agreement under your subdivision bylaw. So those are those instances where you're going to be looking at doing an agreement. In a case where the land is already zoned for multiple residential and someone can make a project that works for the zone and works for all the requirements of the town, it's not going to be a development agreement that they'll need, but perhaps under your water and wastewater bylaw, if there's requirements for connecting services, you could potentially look at something under that as a standard sort of agreement format for each and every new apartment building, let's say. So that's just how this is going to, we're going to have to look at that to just make sure that fits with all the requirements.
Okay, Councilor Blanchard.
Just a quick follow-up. So and that's sort of the way I understood it. Now, so that would be the scenario where it wouldn't necessarily be required. A development agreement wouldn't be required because it meets all the, there's no rezoning required, right? So that's the way I understood it. But to me, I guess, as I was looking at it, if that was happening in the Heritage Business District or in the town plat, where there does seem to be a lot of concern about what is developed down there and how does it fit with the, again, whether it's a municipal plan or just the overall aesthetic of the historic downtown, because that is a big part of who we are. I could see the advantage. I could see the benefit of having development agreements in place, even in situations like that. So I'm actually in favor of something like that. I agree with you, Mayor Henderson, that there's a potential there to add a little bit more red tape. But I do think even that sober second thought, or just having a little more ability to determine what will be in, especially in the Heritage Business District or the town plat there, I think that would be just in those areas, I think it might make sense. So I would be in favor of something governing that aspect of it, not necessarily outside of that, but in those areas, I think it would be nice if we had a bit more say in what showed up down there. That's just sort of my personal opinion. Thank you.
I fully agree with those comments, but maybe I'm mistaken, but through either Mr. Spear or Mr. Henderson, I don't think that this would, if you look at the historic downtown, I don't think this would get what you're looking for in that case. I think because it wouldn't fall into those particular, unless it requires the rezoning or whatever, it wouldn't fall into those particular catches, I guess you could say, of a development agreement. Am I safe to assume that, Mr. Spear and Mr. Henderson?
More or less, Your Worship. So again, staff can't go over and above the bylaws that council has set forth. So if they're coming in, they go to the planning commission with a proposal and it meets all the conditions of the bylaw. And I mean, that's why we had the secondary municipal plan to try to protect the heritage value within there. Then that's the hope, that developers or home property owners are free to build. That's why we put these bylaws in place so they understand what the restrictions, and I use that word loosely, but what the bylaw is, and if they build within that bylaw, then there's no reason to involve council. And these development agreements is a tool that usually goes on stuff that's usually typically outside of a normal build, and so that's.
It sounds like in order to do that, what we need is a heritage bylaw. Let's be straight up about it. It's been ongoing in the community. Every time there's a new building, it's where we get the most input, whether we like it, we don't like it. Everybody has an opinion on every building that's been built since I've been on town council, downtown. Very rarely do you see something built downtown where everybody's in favor of it. So, and sometimes it's done tastefully and to the credit, sometimes it's not. All right. So as we continue to develop the downtown, it's one of those, death by 100 paper cuts, that if you have a new build every 4 years that doesn't fit the feel of the downtown, eventually your downtown is going to look different. And that's something that the previous council wrestled with an overbearing heritage bylaw. And I say that because that was the reason it was defeated by majority of council. They felt that was too much. It wasn't felt that we didn't need one. It was felt that that bylaw was too much. So I think it goes back to do the core and start off with a smaller scale. And I think that this council should have some conversations on what a heritage bylaw looks like from downtown, because we're hoping other things catch it and they're not. And there's and they're, I guess you could say sometimes they're trying to hope that other bylaws reach further to block stuff almost, and it's a shame. But I think that if we want to protect the heritage feel of the downtown, the only way to do that is a heritage bylaw. And I think that that's a conversation that we're going to have. We don't have to have it tonight. So I think it's safe to say that we talked that one out, but it'd be good to see what that looks like on paper, because what I'm hearing is the town solicitor and town staff would prefer to have that for those particular instances. I got some members of council that want to see some clarity of what that exactly looks like. Is that safe to say, council? So sometimes putting it on paper for us so we can circle back and make a better decision on that would be good. But if that's where the solicitor is coming from in town staff, I think we owe it to town staff and the solicitor to see what that looks like, right? So I think that's a good summary. And the other thing that I'll note on the staff report is that we did get the views of the PAC in regards to the zoning bylaw. The PAC is recommending that we take a second look at the 1.25 to the 1 parking spots, in particular, kind of in our downtown historic business district, right? So we don't have to debate that this evening. I think that should be done when we go to next reading, in my own personal opinion, unless I've got that wrong, Mr. Knopper, Mr. Spear. I don't think that we need to get into formal debate tonight. I think that should be done during second reading. Would that be safe to say?
Through your worship, we'd be safe to say that. So is there direction to bring it forward for second reading for debate?
Council, over to you. I would recommend, since this is I know we have the ability to go to second and third reading. My personal opinion and belief is that we should spread this out between a second and third reading. So do the third on a different session, because it's not one of these bylaws where we haven't heard anything. We know that there's opinions different in the community. So as such, I don't want to push something through. Does that make sense to everybody here? Okay, good. I see Councillor Hurdle, your hand's up.
Thanks very much. I know that we're bringing this forward for debate, and I don't intend to debate the issue here tonight, but since we have a municipal planner with us, I thought I might just throw a thought his way, if that's at all possible. Thank you kindly. I just had heard a significant amount of feedback regarding this issue, and I think perhaps that at least myself, maybe I haven't done a great job of explaining where I'm coming from on this issue. But the concept of induced demand, often refers to traffic, and the idea of solving traffic, which is, increase the width of the streets and you solve traffic, which in actual fact, the opposite is true. I understand the opposition to moving from 1.25 to 1. And when you think about it logically, it tends to make sense that, if you're creating more off-street parking, you are then in turn creating more on-street parking for others to use. And the thinking that this is going to increase the availability and access to the downtown. But through induced demand, the opposite is actually true, that if you make it easier to park and drive downtown, you're creating the awareness that it's easier to park and drive downtown, therefore actually making the problem worse instead of actually better. So it doesn't actually solve the issue of parking downtown. And if we were to reduce the minimum from 1.25 to 1, it's not that we're erasing parking at all. It's just it allows us to value that space based on our priorities, based on whether it's a park or it's a tree or it's housing. We can then determine what the best use of that space is actually going to be. And like, I get the pushback on this, because from a logical point of view, it makes sense, but there is that law of induced demand that we have to be very aware of. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, Mr. Henderson.
That's a very good point, Councillor Hurdle. It's one of these very weird conundrums that's been well documented and studied throughout, especially North America. But you can find lots of evidence for this very point. the more you accommodate the vehicle, the more vehicles you will get. And unfortunately, in a place like St. Andrews, it has a perverse effect of compromising the very thing people love about the place, and it's the walkability, the dense closeness of the buildings to the sidewalk, all these things which we're talking about. So no, it's very, very well taken point. And I think some of the interesting things, even with going to the one lane during COVID, it showed some things that could be, and if that was done with some more design and intention, potentially has a lot of opportunity for St. Andrews for accommodating other things and prioritizing other modes of transport. So yeah, it has a potential to open up a whole new way of thinking about vehicles and priorities.
Thank you for the comments, and Councillor Hurdle, it was a very good statement actually to think of that mindset. I don't think in previous debates we actually had that particular way of necessarily looking at it. So again, hoping not to open up the debate because we're running out of time. But Councillor Heenan, if you have a comment or question.
I just have a comment that I applaud Councillor Hurdle because I've tried to explain that, but I never knew what it was called. So I am very grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Heenan. All right, is there anything else for the staff report on that one, Mr. Spear, that you wanted to bring up? I know I summarized it very quickly.
Just a couple of things, Your Worship, really quick. Going back to the parking, just to realize there's other tools you can put in place to help control the parking too. And for instance, one of the concerns is that, that say renters when the no winter ban maybe park there all day, every day. Well, maybe you have time parking on the front streets and stuff, which means more bylaw enforcement. And that's a whole different can of worms. But I'm just saying there's all alternative tools to more parking that can help, and the zoning bylaw that can help the situation. There was a question I remember earlier on to Xander, and I don't want to put Alex on the spotlight, but there was a concern with council. So looking back at the accessory dwelling units, I agree with your perception that, you could have a garage that's so big and then you'd have this other little thing. But there's a concern expressed by council that, let's say you had a garage that was 900 square feet and they put a second story on that for the accessory dwelling unit, that it might overshadow the house, and they'd asked if there's a chance of a percentage of the, another way to control the second structure, so it wasn't overtaking the first structure and ruining the streetscape.
If I may, Your Worship.
Yeah.
There is standards on the height of accessory buildings that would apply to these. So I don't believe the standard for the height of the accessory buildings being affected in this. So we've seen proposals for essentially 2-story garage plus an apartment above the garage, which kind of creates and a peaked roof above that, which, given the effect, the visual effect of that, we've actually recommended PC don't approve variance for that because it looks like a second building on the property, and that is not the intent of this. It's for a garden suite, something that's definitely accessory to the main building. Visually, that works. So in this case, I definitely don't think recommending a change to increase the height, but you can also put in there a little clause that says no higher than the main building to ensure that. I'm just running through the bylaw. This is Xander's file, so I'm not completely.
Well, that's necessary. We have weekly planning meetings or bi-weekly. We'll bring it up there, and maybe, like I said, I hate to put you on the spot, but it was brought up by council in a previous discussion, so I just wanted to bring it forward to remind everybody.
The no higher though to the actual comment, that does make a lot of sense, not to have a bunch of single stories and 2 stories in behind it, just visually from the streetscape. That wouldn't be appealing if you saw that going down a street continuously. So I think that's some merit. Mr. Knopper.
Just one comment, Planner Henderson, can you elaborate as well on the percentage of 2 buildings can take up on one land that the accessory dwelling cannot exceed the size of the house as well, please?
If I may, Your Worship, that is correct. There is a limit on the size of accessory dwelling units. They may not take up more than 10% of the lot. So unlike the main building, which typically, I think we're talking about 40 or 45% of the lot a main building can take up. When it comes to these accessory structures, the terminology is accessory, meaning it's kind of just tucked away on the lot. It's an extra building on the lot to serve the main use. In this case, 10%, I believe, is the maximum size for those external accessory dwelling units.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So unless there's anything else, Mr. Spear, is that correct? Okay, what we'll do is we'll move on for that one, because I am aware that we have at least 2 other long conversations tonight, and I am concerned about the time that's gone by. Thank you very much, Mr. Henderson, for joining us this evening. Sandra gave you a good one with lots of questions and a lengthy conversation, and thanks for waiting 45 minutes. Have yourself a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
At this point, we're going to go into Deputy Mayor Akaji's for Finance and Administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. My finance administration is reference number FA 220307. And it's the bylaw number 22-02, a bylaw to regulate the code of conduct of the Council of the Town of St. Andrews. And this is the second reading. So the background reads like this. A code of conduct bylaw establishes expectations for how council members should conduct themselves while carrying out their responsibilities and in their work as a collective decision-making body for the community. Suggested changes to the code of conduct include a statement of values and principles, enhanced behaviors of council, respect for decision-making process, and adhere to policies and procedures, enhanced use of communication tools and social media, conflict of interest and confidential information, and compliance with the bylaw and corrective actions. Council first gave first reading to bylaw 22-02 on March 21st, 2022. So the action is this: the motion that council grants leave for second reading to the bylaw number 22-02, a bylaw to regulate the code of conduct of the Council of the Town of St. Andrews. And I so move this, Your Worship.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder for that motion? I got Councillor Heenan. Discussion. Councillor Hurdle.
Apologies for dragging this out longer than I should. I know
Okay.
I'm aware of the time. I was going through this again, and I noticed one thing that I just wanted to bring forward, especially Mr. Spear, in your report that said that this provides council the ability to deal with a member that is active outside the bylaw. When I look at on page 58 at 21.1. Which says that members are expected to adhere to the provisions of this bylaw. Council does not have the authority to disqualify or remove a member from office. Only a court of competent jurisdiction or the Minister of Environment and Local Governance can do so. Correct me if I'm wrong, but currently, do we have the power to remove a member of council? And are we now giving up that power?
Thank you,
No,
Councillor Hurdle. Mr. Knopper can answer that question.
So through you, your chair and your mayor, under the Local Governance Act, the council does not have the right to remove a councillor at this point. It is only legislated through the Local Governance Act, as what you stated there, that it can only be done by the Court of Justice or the Minister of Local Government and Government Reform.
Mr. Spear, is there anything to add? Sorry, I cut you off there by accident.
No, it's all right. The only thing I'll add is that under certain circumstances, a member can be removed. So for instance, fraud or something, that ends up being taken, for serious court offenses, that they can be disqualified for holding the office. But for, internal bickering that gets out of hand, there's only so many reprimands we can do. And one of them is not having the ability to kick off members,
Right.
which
But
for democracy is probably the best thing anyway.
Would this give us the flexibility, though, to remove someone from that particular meeting for breaking the code of conduct, though? Like not remove them from council, but remove them from that meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's the spirit of it, maybe, that you can remove them from that meeting, but not permanently off council. But with that being said, we know that St. John City Council, I believe, successfully did that over a councillor missing an extended period of time. So there is ways, I guess.
Your worship, within that, I'll just note the Local Governance Act actually highlights the number of meetings that a councillor must attend, or if in absence without reason, there would be reason at that point for justification of removal.
Perfect. I find that a little bit surprising that it covers attendance, but not code of conduct. Kind of a head scratcher at that one, right? So, so if there's any other questions on that, we'll go to second reading. If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor of going to second reading, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That is everybody. We're going to the second reading. So this is a bylaw 22-02, a bylaw to regulate the code of conduct for the town of, code of conduct of the council, the town of St. Andrews. One is short title, 2 is purpose and application, 3 is definitions, 4 is statutory framework and interpretation, 5 is statement of values and principles of members. 6 is council responsibility, 7 is behavior of members of council, 8 is respect for decision-making process, 9 is adherence to policies, procedures, and bylaws, 10 is orientation and training attendance, 11 is conduct respecting administration rather. 12 is gifts and benefits, 13 is use of local government property resources and services by members of council, 14 is election campaign, 15 use of communication tools and social media, 16 is confidential information, 17 is conflict of interest, 18 is government relationships, 19 business relationships, 20 improper use of influence, 21 is compliance with this bylaw, 22 is repeal and effective date. This was read the first time on the 21st of March 2022 and read the second time here the 4th day of the 4th month of 2022. So thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Akaji. I believe that was the only one in yours, am I correct? That's correct. So we are moving to Councillor Blanchard. But before we get into his motion, we are going to be having a discussion on the Wharf, which is again imposed in your council package. Over 61 was highlighted in Mr. Spear's staff report that there's been a significant increase to the cost. So Mr. Spear, I guess I'll open it up with you on this one.
Thank you, Worship. And so, Council, as you know, we were approved the funding for this in early to mid 2020. And so we have started the process of initial planning. Part of the delay too has been through some of the consultation we had to do on the environment and with local First Nations groups. And so over the winter, CBCL came in and finally did a geotechnical survey. I had advised you on that, but basically to see how shallow the bedrock was there, which most of us know is relatively shallow in our area. And so as determined, they found out it was. And so it's hard for them to find a way to drive the without getting into dynamiting or really expensive mechanisms to drive the piles into the bedrock. And so they provided us with 3 alternatives. One was a pipe pile structure, which essentially is steel post, like a bridge with a cement top. So for the project that we originally budgeted at $5.5 million a couple of years ago, the estimate is $8.5 million, over $3 million. A second is precast concrete caissons. So basically they take square cubes, fill them full of rock, set them down, and then put a concrete decking on top. It's cheaper at $7.5 million, but the struggle with that one is they can only work at low tide. So the timing of it is a concern. And I've asked the engineers to follow up to see exactly how long that would take to do. And then the third is to basically replace what we've got there and just, that would increase the project to $7.5 million to basically rebuild the timber crib and a cement deck. It would another 30 or 40 years that would probably be looking at replacement again. And what staff have noted is that the type of lumber and the methods they used in the mid 20th century have changed, and probably because the environmental that was in some of that wood originally, I don't know what they're putting in it, but it gave longer life, but had some seepage early on. So the new methodology isn't giving very long lasting life in pressure treated wood. And we probably have all noticed that if we've ever built with it. And so that, but still came at 7.6 million. So what you have to remember is we can't go back to the and ask for more money on this original grant. We might be able to work around and find others, but that could delay it for a couple of years. That at the time we thought we could come up with about, $500,000 to $1 million for cost overruns, but this is well above that. And again, this is just a still high-end level estimate. It's hard to say where it may go. So we're meeting with CBCL. We've already met with them once and gave them some direction last week. And so there's really 2 or 3 things we can look at. There's number one is going back to the original rock structure. I know that was hated by the town, but it's just to give a comparison of what it would be. So that's basically to tear out the first like 100 feet of deck and put in the rock that we talked about. Number 2, which seems to make the most sense, is that we do a hybrid of that, where we extend the shores quite significantly with infill. So maybe, half of that, 100 and some feet. So it increases tremendously the size of Market Square. It tremendously increases the size of the base of the wharf. And then you'd still have the traditional wharf. It'd just be a little bit shorter than what we have now. So they're going to cost that. I mean, that won't take much time. Another option, which I'm not particularly in favor of, is just fixing what we have there now, which would give us maybe 15 or 20 years. But the problem that we have is that the project funding we have right now is contingent on fighting climate change. And in order to do that, we have to raise the decking of the wharf. And with the current structure that's there, we can't do enough to it to add more cement or more weight on the top of it to get that extra half a meter that we're aiming towards. So that's impractical. So it'd be a lot cheaper than these options significantly, but we'd be on it for the whole cost likely. And so it means we'd get less of a product, and that how long it lasts, it'd just be a couple of decades, we'd be looking at it more. So it's really a question of where to go from here. We're going back to the engineers saying, I've already said this is way too much money. You've got to try to figure out. So we gave them a 3 more options to look at. And, maybe you'd like to have them come down and do a quick presentation within the report. You've seen them, but maybe be an opportunity through Zoom or live in council. They can give an explanation what each of these types of structures are, so people can just get an idea of what they're talking about. The good news is those budgets include all the work to be completed on the wharf. So that's Market Square. There's work on the steel piles at the end of the wharf, some other stuff that was going on. So that's the whole budget, just not the structure. But still, it's significantly above of what we estimated. And the other concern, of course, is that once the prices come in, it could be even higher. And we're still getting them to work on a timeline. Like, we told them we can't lose a summer, that, most of the users only have 3 to 4 months of use or less. So, they're trying to work around and figure out what it would actually take to do that and present that in the final report.
Thank you, Mr. Spear. That was a good summary. So I think this might be a little quicker than I originally anticipated based on some of your comments. I think everyone on this call knows that we're already spending over $1 million to see it go up 3 million. Expect the town of St. Andrews to pay $4 million to do those improvements. It's just, Mr. Spear, you can comment to it more specifically, but I think it's a price that this town almost can't afford. That would be a major expenditure that we would have to incur a significant amount of debt. And I don't even know what the impacts would be on users at the wharf when you're putting that much money into an asset that I know tourists enjoy, other residents like to walk down, but the reality is there is people that use it more than others. When you're taking $4 million, I don't even want to know where that would go, to be completely honest, to pay that back, the amount of debt. So I think as much as I don't want to, I want to say that I think that council needs more options and more numbers. I really think that that's what we need, the background report on this, from that hybrid model of rock to the rock. And I do note that if we are going to be switching either of those plans, that there is a component of community consultation that's required. And I will say that when we're doing those, it's not as simple as a financial mean. There's an environmental impact, and then there's a perceived environmental impact as well, where anyone that has erosion on anywhere in the front of St. Andrews will complain that it's because of what we did if we're putting in more fill. Just my own personal opinion based on things that I've seen on my time on council. So council, I don't know about you, but I think it's pretty safe to see that we need to see the options and we need to see the numbers behind it to be able to make a better informed opinion. Is that safe to say at this point? Other than I am a little frustrated. We've been following the process. and I understand the process and I support the process, but we've followed the process. And in the meantime, with consultation things, the price has gone to a spot where we can't do the project. But I talked to someone building a house and the builders weren't available, and they were, and now they're in a different price because of the cost, everything, when they were ready to go months ago. So I don't think we're saying anything that the world isn't experiencing either. And I say that very, very easily. Councillor Blanchard.
Hey, just a quick question. Was it the geotechnical survey I realized was just completed? Was that not done during the initial planning stages as well? Like, was that information not available, like in terms of the shallow bedrock and things like that, way back when? Or why is that? I'm just wondering why this is new information for us, or maybe it isn't. I'm just curious to know.
It can't say it. Well,
Go ahead.
okay, sorry. It's not really new information. We pretty much assume that because we have enough experience. For instance, we did, we removed the silt and stuff in the past, dredging some of the bay. So it wasn't new. So they made plans around it. Really, within the reports, and I think I made a reference to it, they had said that a lot of the cost was in the budgeting, was interested in the cost of materials and stuff now. But a little bit of the problem is with the type of mechanisms they could put in there to support the wharf. And so, it's one thing if we could have driven the piles down, 40 feet into the ground to support it, but we're left with a thing where, you've got to create structures that are basically sitting on the earth at ground level, for lack of a better word, sitting on the seabed to support this. So it changes the type of engineering that they have to do. It should be noted too, Council, that when we originally looked at this way back when, the rock wharf was the only one that was really on the table. And then and that was the original application. And then as council got looking at it, the previous council, they decided that might not have been the best thing. So that changed engineering a little bit on it at that point. And now they've taken a harder look at it. And with the additional cost because of the financial situation or the inflation we're in, it's just made it that much worse.
I know you touched on it, Mr. Spear, but is there any value in going back to the grant to say it's outside of our means now? Is there anything you can do to direct us where to go?
Certainly, Your Worship, and I think it'd be also a good conversation to have with our local MP about it, and there might be alternative measures they can do to help do that. There's one other option I'll throw out there that so you're aware, and we've talked about it. If we cut traffic to the wharf, we'd have to do next to nothing to it. The problem with the structure is we've got fuel trucks and heavy equipment going out there a lot. It is necessary for those people that are using it for the use, the commercial users, from the fishermen to the tour boat operators. But it's a whole different conversation if we made that a pedestrian only wharf, but it would make life much more difficult for them for fueling and other services that they require off a commercial wharf.
Perfect. So sounds like we're going to need an analysis on all those. I don't see how council can come with any real opinion without knowing what the cost. And the other cost I would like to know is how much would it cost just to repair the existing wharf? Because I have no idea how much that would cost, but if that's $1 million, that's what we're spending anyway, right? So, Councillor Hurdle.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had a quick question, and again, it's just regarding the appetite for this. I'm not really even sure because there might be some commercial operators who may prefer to operate it at a bayside terminal. Now that we potentially have that as an option, I don't know if that would reduce traffic at all, or if even anyone would want to do that, but it might work for some. So I'm wondering if we could get an idea of that, and if at all possible.
The problem with the bayside terminal, for one thing, even in a year when it's within their jurisdiction, it's private property, right? So it's their own thing. But number two is, how we shut off the wharf and have all that security when there's foreign boats in or vessels? They have to go through that every time they have a foreign vessel. And most of their traffic is foreign vessels, from shipping from other areas coming into town. And so that means the availability of their general docking space is very limited. And so that's been the problem. I don't disagree with you. And if we could make it work, and maybe I'll get into discussion with some of the representatives out there and see if there's any possibility for some of this stuff where they could go out there and fuel up, because honestly, it's not that big of a sail up there for anybody to reach that, and it'd be a little inconvenient for them. But at the end of the day, they needed to do it because most of them are fueling up at the wee hours of the morning, not in the middle of the day. So they can meet the fuel truck and still have the whole day to service their customers.
Thank you.
Perfect. Councillor Heenan.
I'm always the devil's advocate, but I would hate to see us lose the availability of a commercial wharf, of having vehicle traffic to go out there. It's just, we don't know what the future is going to hold for the town. We also have, and we're trying to steer away, I understand, about like downtown walking traffic, but you're going to have folks that come to town that are wheelchair handicapped, whatever, and they like to drive out the wharf. And I know that, you know, we have to spend our money wisely, but I just worry down the road, if we cut corners now, is it going to cost us more down the road? That's just all I'd like to say. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Heenan. So unless anyone from council is opposed, I would say that on all the recommendations Mr. Spear did, I'd like to see kind of a estimate, and I know that they're looking at them already, but an estimate of what the costing is to help us make a more informed opinion. Councillor Hurl.
Thank you, Your Worship. All I would ask is, if possible, I know that option 2, for example, in this case, gives us a highest risk of cost overruns. If we could get a ceiling on some of the options, like what would the highest risk amount be if we're looking at other options that may have a risk similar? Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I think that that's good for that one. I appreciate that, Mr. Spear, although it's obviously grim news, really, is the way I look at it, because I was really hoping that that project was something that we were convincing right away and we had the funds to get it done. But based on the cost of everything right now, I'm not surprised, really. I don't think anyone is, unfortunately. So the next one will go to Councillor Blanchard.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just pull up my stuff here. We are, sorry, I'm just flipping through here, get past the current one was the previous one was a large one. There we go.
Yeah.
I've got it. So we are on PW 220406. It is the municipal greenhouse gas emissions and energy study. Excuse me. So the town of St. Andrews has been working with Eastern Charlotte Waterways through an environmental trust fund grant from the province of New Brunswick on the development of a municipal greenhouse gas emissions and energy study. It's provided at the regular council meeting of April the 4th, 2022, earlier this evening, was a presentation by Aldea Poirier and Brianna Cowie of Eastern Charlotte Waterways, highlighting the process and the final report. For council to add this as part of the ongoing town strategy to mitigate emissions and energy reduction processes, the municipal greenhouse gas emissions and energy study needs to be adopted by council. Provided with this report is a copy of the study. And the motion is that council adopt the municipal greenhouse gas emissions and energy study completed by Eastern Charlotte Waterways and funded through the Environmental Trust Fund of the province of New Brunswick on April the 4th, 2022. And I so move.
Seconder for that motion, Councillor Heenan, and we'll open that up for discussion. Again, just if you adopt something doesn't mean you're doing it all. It means that you're accepting the document, just to be clear. It doesn't mean we're not going to do it all, but there was a number of recommendations and that will take a lengthy period of time, as we know. So with no further questions, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving this motion, please signify by saying aye. And that has been approved. So we are off. Thank you, Councillor Blanchard, and we're on to Councillor Hurdle, actually.
Thank you, Your Worship. Apologies, I was going to find my place.
Page 111, Councillor.
Thank you very much. So this is reference BTHC 220402, and the subject is Canada Day 2022 road closure request. The background is that the town of St. Andrews has received a request for road and market square closures from Tressa Bevington, event coordinator for the Canada Day celebrations taking place on Friday, July 1st, 2022. The road closure request is from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. to accommodate for all the requests, parades, and entertainment to take place in the community. The following requests are being made. Main road closure from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Water Street at Elizabeth Street, Water at Edward Street, Water Street at William Street, Water Street at King Street, and Water Street at Frederick Street. Temporary closure from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. King Street at Queen Street to accommodate for the farmers market. Town support for the road closure for the parade. The parade will start from the NBCC on Augusta Street to Water Street, and will move along Water Street to Harriet Street, continuing to the arena, and the parade will start at 1 p.m. And the closure of Market Square from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. And the motion before us is that council approves the road closures and Market Square closure for the Canada Day 2022 celebrations on Friday, July 1st, 2022, with the following streets and times. Main road closure from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Water Street at Elizabeth Street, Water Street at Edward Street, Water Street at William Street, Water Street at King Street, Water Street at Frederick Street, and temporary closure from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. King Street at Queen Street to accommodate for the farmers market, closure of Market Square from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. and support for road closure for the parade starting at 1 p.m. from NBCC at Augusta Street to Harriet Street at the W.C. O'Neill Arena Complex. And I so move.
Thank you. Seconder, Deputy Mayor Akergy, discussion on this one? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving this motion, please signify by saying aye. That is everybody. That has been carried. Excited to see we're planning a community gathering day. It's been a long time, really. I know we had an appreciation day, but that's this is one that puts St. Andrews on the map, in my opinion. So great to see. And the next motion, Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is another exciting one. This is in reference BTHC 220401, and the subject is Indulge 2022, New Brunswick's Food and Wine Festival request for road closure. The background is that the town of St. Andrews has received a request from Tressa Bevington, event organizer for Indulge Taste of St. Andrews event scheduled for Friday, October 14th, 2022. They have requested that Water Street be closed to vehicular traffic for the event running from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. The request is to have the following intersections and road closures from 3 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. on October the 14th. That's Water Street at Edward Street, Water Street at William Street, Water Street at King Street, and Water Street at Frederick Street. This has been a common request that council has supported in the past to ensure the event can run safely on Water Street. And the motion before us is that council approves the road and intersection closures for the Indulge 2022 New Brunswick's Food and Wine Festival, quote, Taste of St. Andrews, and quote, event scheduled for Friday, October 14th, 2022 from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. along the following streets: Water Street at Edward Street, Water Street at William Street, Water Street at King Street, and Water Street at Frederick Street. And I so move.
Great reading. A seconder. Councillor Blanchard, discussion on this one? Call the question then. All those in favor of approving this motion, please signify by saying aye. That is everybody. So that has been carried. And a reminder to start dieting now for all of the amazing calories that you'll be partaking in at that particular time of year. So that takes us off yours, Councillor Hurdle, and we're now moving into Councillor Gumachel's, which I don't know, Councillor Gumachel, if you'd like to kick it off, but this is in regards to discussion on bylaw 015, which is around the skateboard, scooters, and inline skates in St. Andrews, which is RCS 220404. And just to talk plainly, it is a bylaw which prohibits skateboard, scooters, and inline skates in downtown St. Andrews. Basically, you can go to the downtown on the side streets, but you're not allowed to actually use those particular methods on the downtown. This has been brought up in the past, but Councillor Gumachel is very, very passionate about this one, and a new council might be new views and new ideas. So I'll pass it over to you, Councillor Gumachel.
Thank you, Worship. In the interest of time, maybe we just do a poll of a quick poll, or I can read something that I prepared. Just not feeling top shelf. That's all.
All right. Well, that's fair enough. So I guess really we don't have to decide if this is happening or not. It would require it to go to 3 readings and a hearing of objection, since it is a bylaw. So we don't need to really go into a lengthy debate. To Councillor Gumachel's point, I guess what Councillor Gumachel is asking is, would council care to reopen this bylaw? It's, I guess, originally put in place due to safety concerns on the busy downtown. And at the time when it was implemented, the council today thought that this was a way to prohibit accidents from happening. And I guess that's the quickest summary, but also I will note in fairness to this conversation, it does feel a little bit like Dirty Dancing as well, or whatever the movie was. Footloose, I don't know which one it was, where you're not allowed to dance in the community, Councilor Gubishel. So I can see both sides of it. There's a safety concern, but there's also let the kids play, right? So I guess with that being said, based on Councilor Gubishel's comments, would anybody be in favor of bringing this forward the next meeting for potential first reading?
To repeal it.
To repeal it, sorry, yes.
I'd be in favor of that.
Okay, so I'm seeing enough hands right now. So what we'll do is we will open up this and bring that forward to the next meeting. Is that suffice for everyone this evening? Does that work? All right, thank you very much. So that wraps up that one. We've already done the planning and the economic development. So there is nothing under new business. Question period, Mr. Knopper, anything before us?
Your worship, I've received no correspondence during your meeting.
Okay, and at this point, we're going into councillor and deputy mayor comments. A long meeting. Anyone have anything they'd like to add? Myself, I have nothing this evening as well. So at 8:34 p.m., I'm going to look for a mover to go into closed session per the Local Governance Act, Section 68(1)(c), information that could cause financial loss or gain to a person or the local government, or could jeopardize negotiations leading to an agreement and the proposed or pending acquisition and disposition of land. Could I have a mover? Councillor Gubishel, seconded by Councillor Heenan. All in favor of going to closed session, please signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed? Seeing none. I just realized Councillor Hurdle was frozen, so I didn't see a hand there for a minute. At this point, we're in closed session, so we'll give Mr. Knopper just a minute to shut everything down. And Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Heenan. All in favor of coming out of closed session, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That is everybody. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
We've got Deputy Mayor Akachi and Councillor Gubishel consistently. I understand, Councillor Hurdle, you're trying, but that's the deputy. That's the deputy mayor's right. So all in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye.
I don't say much all
Thank you,
day.
Council.
Goodbye, folks. Bye.